The Nintendo Switch 2 has been leaked, and it is getting some pretty massive updates. And these updates are in terms of the display, performance, docked mode, design, and we even have some info regarding the price. So, without any further ado, here's how the Switch 2 will improve over the original in each of these areas. Starting off with the display, the very first news on this comes from EDN, who've had a mixed track record in the past, claiming that Nintendo has already started preparing the mass production for the next-gen Switch, which will be launched in 2021. So yeah, just a few months essentially. This report claims that the Switch 2 will be using mini LED technology and that the displays will be manufactured by Taiwanese company Innolux. Mini LED is actually a pretty big deal. It is a new display panel technology which sits right in between LCD and OLED, which can offer significantly better contrast than LCD thanks to multiple dimming zones, without the downsides of OLED such as low brightness and the risk of burn-in. Now, the only problem that I find in this report is that Mini LED is still quite expensive to manufacture. It's not as expensive as OLED, but definitely more expensive than traditional LCD. And it's also quite tricky to manufacture, so if Nintendo plans on actually using Innolux, who will be new to the Mini LED manufacturing, I am not sure if they will be able to keep up with the demand. Keep in mind that Nintendo has sold over 62 million Switches since its launch in 2017, which is obviously a lot. However, we do have a second report on this coming from Bloomberg, which claims that Nintendo would actually be using a Samsung OLED display instead of the Mini LED panel made by Innolux. Now, this is way more believable, as Samsung will be able to keep up with Nintendo's demand fairly easily. OLED also has a better contrast, perfect black levels, and consumes less power than Mini LED. In many ways, it is the superior technology, just slightly more expensive. Bloomberg has a very good track record, so if I am to believe one report, I would definitely believe theirs. Aside from the display being an OLED panel, Bloomberg also claims that it would be a 7-inch panel with the same 720p resolution. Now, before we all go nuts on that 720p resolution, let's analyze the improvements that this display will bring us. First, the fact that this is going to be an OLED display means that we would get a gigantic boost in terms of colors, contrast, and the black levels would finally be perfectly black, as opposed to being these grayish ones that we had on the original Switch. We all know that a display on the Switch is pretty bad when compared to any other smartphone on the market right now, so the switch to OLED would really be the biggest improvement overall, actually, that we're getting with the Switch 2. Second, the fact that we're getting a larger 7-inch display from the 6.2-inch panel means that all games will be far more immersive. Also, 6.2-inch might seem like a small display on paper, but Nintendo uses a different aspect ratio when compared to a traditional smartphone, and so the display is actually much bigger than a phone with a similar display diagonal. And third, let's talk about the resolution. The current Switch has a 6.2-inch, 1280 by 720 resolution display with a PPI of 236. This PPI is definitely very low when compared to a smartphone's, which is usually around 400 to 500, but when we compare this to the PPI of, let's say, an iPad, which is 264, you can see that there isn't that much of a difference. The iPad has a Retina display, and the only reason why we can call that 264 PPI a Retina display is because from the normal viewing distance that you use an iPad from, you are not able to see any pixels. And I don't know about you, but I use my Switch from about the same distance that I use my iPad from, and I think most people do the same. The Switch 2, with a 7-inch display and the same resolution, would drop the PPI to 209, which, while not ideal, I don't think this is going to be that bad, as you would be even further away from your current Switch as the display would be larger, so I don't think it's gonna be that bad. Still, I believe that the reason why Nintendo wants to go for this 720p display is because of cost and power consumption. Let me know in the comments if you would be willing to trade some of the battery life and or pay more for the Switch in exchange for a sharper display. I think I would. I would definitely pay more for a sharper display. I wouldn't trade the battery life though. Okay, the next big improvement is in terms of the performance. The Switch 1 came with NVIDIA's Tegra X1 processor, and this was a very, very, very slow chip. It came out in 2015, and it was based on a 20 nanometer manufacturing process, so This thing was a power hog. Now, Nvidia did release an improved version of it in 2019, which was based on a smaller 16nm manufacturing process. Therefore, it was way more power efficient, as it increased the battery life from a maximum of 6.5 hours to 9 hours on the Redbox Switch revision from 2019. So what about the Switch 2? Well, Bloomberg released another report in late March 2021 stating that instead of Nintendo using an off-the-shelf processor, like they did with the Switch 1, Nvidia will now be making a custom chip just for the Nintendo Switch 2, which would bring some serious performance improvements. On top of that, this report claims that the Switch 2 will include more RAM and a higher clock speed, all to deliver a next-generation experience on the Switch 2. What this means is that we could actually see a gigantic leap in graphics, similar to what we've seen from the PS2 to the PS3. We don't yet know if Nintendo will be making any exclusives for the Switch 2, or if new games will be developed for both the current Switch and the Switch 2, but there's no denying that the Switch 2 will have significantly more power, and Nintendo will for sure make use of that. Now, the Switch is all about mobile gaming, being able to play whenever and wherever you are. I'm not sure if you heard of the game Darkfire Heroes, but they reached out, wanted me to try their game, and sponsored this video for me to give you my thoughts on it. If you're a fan of tower defense games, Darkfire Heroes is similar, as you encounter a swarm of enemies that become harder and harder the more you progress through the level. But at the same time, everything else is completely different. For example, you build your team out of the dozens of heroes in the game, which will automatically progress and fight the enemies, and you can use spells and attacks to help them out. After a fight has ended, you earn experience and loot, which you can use to further upgrade your heroes and progress into the game. As a full RPG game, there is tons of loot to collect, with each level being part of a very extensive campaign. The game also features a real-time PvP arena with some great graphics, easy controls, and overall, it is a lot of fun. And it is also free to play. Use the link in the description to get exclusive loot as a new player. Right, now I have some pretty big updates for you in terms of the docked mode. Bloomberg's report that talked about the new Nvidia chips in the Switch 2 also mentioned that these new chips would feature Nvidia's Deep Learning Super Sampling, aka DLSS. In case you don't know what DLSS is, it is Nvidia's way of upscaling a game with minimal loss to its quality. We already have DLSS on PC, and what this does is that it allows you to play a game at 1080p resolution and then have it upscaled to 4K, for example, while leaving you with a similar frame rate as if you were to run the game at 1080p. Now, of course, this won't be as sharp as native resolution, but it still is surprisingly close, and you get a massive boost in performance that way. The PlayStation and the Xbox have both had dynamic resolution upscaling since the PS4 Pro and the Xbox One X. DLSS is basically just that, but a bit better. Okay, but how would DLSS help the Switch 2 when it is already running on a low-resolution 720p display? Well, it is all about docked mode. Bloomberg claims that the Switch 2 will support 4K resolution when docked. Finally. Running the Switch 1 in 1080p on my 4K TV looks pretty bad, so I cannot wait to have a 4K version of the Switch, even though it won't technically be native 4K, but rather upscaled from likely 1080p, as just like the Switch 1, the Switch 2 will most certainly boost its clocks when connected to the dock, and therefore run at 1080p, which DLSS in turn will upscale to 4K. Although, I was personally hoping for something a bit different. Something like an actual GPU inside the dock, so that when you connect the Switch to the dock, it would switch to the more powerful GPU inside the dock and deliver a way higher resolution natively, alongside, of course, improved frame rates. But something like that would increase the cost substantially, so I do get why Nintendo has chosen the DLSS path instead. Also, Bloomberg stated back in September 2020 that a few developers were told by Nintendo directly to optimize their games for 4K support, again, hinting at the 4K capabilities of the next Switch. Not only that, but this implies that we would be able to play Switch 1 games on the Switch 2, which is pretty great, as all next-gen consoles do support some sort of backwards compatibility. And what this means is that you should be able to easily transfer your entire Switch 1 library onto the Switch 2 and play everything at higher graphical settings. Also, one last thing regarding the dock, according to leaker Oatmeal Dome, the latest Switch update, so 12.0.0, which came out on the 6th of April, it actually adds a reference to 4K output over DisplayPort, again giving us a hint at that 4K support for the Switch 2. So what about the design now? Well, unfortunately we haven't really had any specific leaks on this yet, but based on the leaks that we have seen, we have designed our very own concept, and this is how we imagined it. First, we increased the display size from 6.2 inches to that leaked 7 inches, and in doing so, we managed to considerably reduce the bezels whilst keeping the same form factor. Now, because the bezels are much smaller now, they are part of the body, and therefore, just like with the Switch Lite, we managed to give the Switch 2 an entire coating of color that now covers the frame of the display too, rather than it remaining black. We've also redesigned the joysticks to make them larger and easier to use, and we've also increased the height of the share and home buttons to make them easier to feel. But probably the biggest change that we've made is in terms of the stand. You all know that the kickstand on the current Switch is completely trash. It barely holds the Switch up, it can break super easily. Yeah, it's really bad. So what we did is that we made it significantly larger so that it covers the entire back portion of the device. This makes it sturdier and less prone to its detaching. And there you go. This is our concept of the Switch 2. Definitely subscribe if you like what you're seeing, as we'll have plenty more concepts in the near future. And finally, we have the price. The Nintendo Switch currently sells for $300, while the Switch Lite sells for $200. Bloomberg reported that they believe the Switch 2 to be at least $100 more expensive than the Switch 1, potentially costing as much as $400. But $400 is a lot for a Switch, as that's exactly how much the digital version of the PS5 costs. They could, however, price it at $350, which Bloomberg believes could also be the case. Japan-based games consultant Serkan Toto said in an interview to GamesIndustry.biz that he also expects the Switch 2 to cost $400. And interesting enough, leaker A Rumors says that there is a chance that Nintendo will price the Switch 2 at $299 or a tiny bit over, but not include that 4K dock. Instead, you'll likely have to buy that separately, which I do think is a really good thing for Nintendo to do, as people who just want to buy the new Switch but don't really care about connecting it to the TV can indeed pay less and get it. Let me know in the comments what you guys think of the Switch 2, and will you actually upgrade from the Switch 1? Give it a like if you enjoyed it to let us know, and definitely subscribe if you want to see more Leaks and Rumors episodes and more interesting tech videos like this one, hopefully was. I'm Daniel, this has been Zen of Tech, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Zen of Tech, signing out. Cheers.